The sound of splintering wood echoed across the dusty plains as Rosalie Evans clutched the reins with white knuckles. The wagon wheels hit another deep rut, sending her precious cargo of medical supplies bouncing precariously close to the edge. She hadn't expected the journey from Denver to the small frontier town of Silverridge to be easy, but the gathering storm clouds and increasingly treacherous terrain were making this final stretch a nightmare. "Whoa there," Rosalie called to her team of horses as thunder cracked overhead. At 22, she'd made this supply run countless times since inheriting her father's medical practice after his passing last year, but never alone during storm season. The year was 1876, and Colorado Territory was still wild and unpredictable, especially for a woman traveling solo. Rain began pelting down, transforming the already difficult trail into slippery mud. Rosalie's heart raced as the wagon picked up speed on a downward slope. Her attempts to slow the horses failed as panic set in. The left front wheel caught on something, a rock, a root, she couldn't tell, and suddenly the world was spinning. The horses screamed, Rosalie screamed, and then came darkness, pain. That was her first thought as consciousness returned. Her second was that she couldn't move. Opening her eyes, Rosalie realized with horror that the wagon had overturned completely. Her lower body was pinned beneath its weight, rain pouring through the broken slats onto her face. "Help!" she cried, her voice barely audible over the storm. The horses were nowhere in sight. They must have broken free. Nobody traveled this route regularly, especially in such weather. Silverridge was still hours away, and her chances of being found before nightfall were slim to none. As darkness began to fall and the temperature dropped, Rosalie felt fear gripping her chest. Her medical training told her that her circulation was being cut off, and if she remained trapped much longer, she might lose her legs if she survived at all. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the storm. "Hello, is someone there?" called a deep voice. "Here, I'm here," Rosalie shouted with all her remaining strength. A figure on horseback appeared through the rain, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He dismounted swiftly, approaching the overturned wagon with caution. "Madam, are you hurt?" The man crouched down, his face coming into view. Despite her pain, Rosalie couldn't help but notice his strong jawline and concerned blue eyes beneath the brim of his rain-soaked hat. "I'm trapped," she managed, her voice shaking. "The wagon, I can't feel my legs anymore." "Name's Nathan Lawson," he said, quickly assessing the situation. "I'm going to get you out of there." Nathan circled the wagon, his expression grave as he realized the predicament. The wagon had settled into the mud, making it impossible to simply pull her free. It would need to be lifted. "I'll have to jack it up," he explained, rolling up his sleeves. "It'll take some doing, but I've got you, miss." Rosalie Evans," she replied through chattering teeth. "I'm the doctor from Denver." His eyebrows rose slightly. "A lady doctor. Well, guess I'd better get you out quick so you can tend to yourself." Despite his attempt at lightness, Rosalie could see the concern in his eyes. With determined efficiency, Nathan gathered stones and branches, creating a makeshift lever system. The rain continued to pour as he worked, the mud making everything slippery and treacherous. "On 3, I'm going to lift," he explained, positioning himself at the lever he'd created. "When you feel the pressure ease, try to pull yourself free if you can." Nathan counted down and then strained against the lever with all his might. The wagon groaned but barely moved. He repositioned and tried again, this time putting his shoulder directly against the wagon's frame for additional leverage. The rough wood tore through his shirt and into his skin, but he didn't stop. "Almost there," he grunted, blood beginning to seep from his torn palms as he gripped the splintered wood. With a tremendous effort that sent pain shooting through his shoulders, Nathan managed to lift the wagon just enough. "Now, Miss Evans." Rosalie summoned her remaining strength and dragged herself forward, inch by painful inch, until she was clear of the crushing weight. As soon as she was free, Nathan released his hold, collapsing to his knees beside her as the wagon crashed back into the mud. Rain washed over them both as they caught their breath. Rosalie looked up at her rescuer, noting the blood streaming from his hands and the gashes on his forearms. "You're hurt," she said, professional instinct taking over despite her own pain. "You're the one who was just crushed by a wagon," he replied with a wry smile that didn't quite mask his concern. "Can you move your legs now?" Rosalie cautiously wiggled her toes, relief washing over her as sensation returned with painful pins and needles. "Yes, thank goodness." "Nothing seems broken, just badly bruised and numb from the pressure." Nathan nodded, clearly relieved. "My camp's not far. I can take you there to recover before the storm gets worse." He helped her onto his horse, then gathered what supplies he could salvage from her wagon. His bloodied hands left crimson smears on everything he touched, but he worked without complaint. When he'd secured what he could, he led the horse on foot, refusing Rosalie's insistence that she could walk. "I've had worse," was all he said, trudging through the mud with grim determination. Nathan's camp turned out to be a small but sturdy cabin nestled in a copse of pines about a mile from the accident. "It's not much," he apologized as he helped her inside. "I'm working as a scout for the new railway line. They let me use this old trapper's cabin while I map the area." The interior was simple but clean, with a small fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Nathan quickly set about lighting the fire, his movements efficient despite his injured hands. "Let me see those," Rosalie said once she was settled near the growing flames. Her doctor's bag had been among the items Nathan had salvaged, and she now opened it with practiced ease. "Your injuries first," he protested, but Rosalie was already examining her legs. The skin was badly bruised but intact, and she could move everything properly, albeit with significant pain. "I'm fine," she insisted, "but those hands need attention before infection sets in." Reluctantly, Nathan sat across from her, extending his ravaged palms. Splinters of wood were embedded in the torn flesh, and deep gashes crisscrossed his skin where he'd gripped the rough timber to lift the wagon. "This will hurt," she warned as she began cleaning the wounds. Nathan remained stoic as she meticulously removed each splinter and cleaned the cuts with antiseptic from her supplies. Only the occasional sharp intake of breath betrayed his discomfort. "You have remarkably steady hands for someone who was just in an accident," he observed as she worked. "Medical training," she explained, not looking up. "My father taught me to separate my own discomfort from the task at hand." "Your father was a doctor too?" Rosalie nodded. "He believed women could be just as capable as men in medicine. Not everyone agrees." "Well, I'm mighty glad for his progressive thinking right about now," Nathan said with a small smile that transformed his weather-worn face. As she wrapped his hands in clean bandages, Rosalie studied her rescuer more carefully. He was perhaps 28, with sun-browned skin and lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious demeanor indicated. His dark hair curled slightly where it was still damp from the rain. "Why were you out in this weather?" she asked, securing the last bandage. "Mapping the Western Passage. Railway companies paying good money to find the most efficient route through these hills," he explained. "Storm caught me on my way back. Lucky for both of us, I'd say." The rain continued to pound on the roof as Nathan prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. They ate in companionable silence, both exhausted from their ordeal. "You can take the bed," Nathan said when they'd finished. "I'll sleep by the fire." Rosalie started to protest, but the aching in her body convinced her otherwise. "Just for tonight," she conceded. "Tomorrow I need to get to Silverridge. They're expecting these medical supplies." "We'll figure something out in the morning," Nathan assured her. "For now, rest." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Rosalie. She lay awake, listening to the rain and occasional rumble of thunder, acutely aware of Nathan's presence across the small cabin. He had saved her life with nothing but his bare hands and sheer determination. Such men were rare on the frontier. "Nathan," she called softly, unsure if he was still awake. "Yes," came his immediate response. "Thank you for what you did today." There was a pause before he answered. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly, "they wouldn't have." The following morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Rosalie awoke to find Nathan already outside, examining what remained of her wagon, which he must have retrieved at first light. "The axle's broken clean through," he reported when she joined him. And one wheel's completely shattered. It's beyond repair out here. Rosalie's heart sank. Those supplies were desperately needed in Silverridge, where an outbreak of fever had been reported. How far is it to town? She asked. About 15 miles, Nathan replied. Too far for you to walk in your condition. He seemed to consider something, then nodded as if making up his mind. I'll pack what we can carry onto my horse. We'll ride double to Silverridge. But your hands are perfectly functional, thanks to your doctoring, he insisted, flexing his bandaged fingers to demonstrate. Besides, I was headed that way eventually, just moving up my schedule. They spent the morning salvaging what they could from Rosalie's wagon. Many of the glass bottles had shattered, but the majority of the medicines had survived, protected by careful packaging. By midday, they were on the trail, Rosalie seated behind Nathan on his sturdy bay gelding. She tried to maintain a proper distance, but the uneven trail often sent her pressed against his back, her arms tightening around his waist for stability. So what brought a city-trained doctor out to these parts? Nathan asked as they rode through a particularly scenic valley. I was born in Denver, she explained. My father established his practice there when it was barely more than a mining camp. As it grew, so did his reputation. When he died last year, I took over. Most women would have sold the practice, Nathan observed without judgment. Most women weren't raised by Douglas Evans, Rosalie replied with a fond smile. He believed I could do anything if I worked hard enough, even convinced the medical college in Philadelphia to accept me. You must miss him. Every day, she admitted, but continuing his work helps. These monthly supply runs to outlying towns were his idea. He said medicine shouldn't be a luxury only city folk can afford. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Noble thinking. What about you? Rosalie asked. Mapping for railways seems an unusual occupation. I've always had a good eye for land, he explained. Served as a scout in the war, then did some surveying for the government afterward. Railway work pays better, though. Do you have family waiting somewhere? A shadow crossed his face. Not anymore. Lost my parents to influenza in '68. My brother fell at Antietam. I'm sorry, she said softly. Nathan shrugged, but Rosalie could sense the grief he carried. That's life out west, makes you appreciate each day you get. They lapsed into silence, the rhythm of the horses' hooves marking time as they traveled. The afternoon sun warmed Rosalie's back, and despite the lingering pain from her accident, she found herself enjoying the journey in a way she never had before. As they crested a hill, Nathan suddenly tensed. Riders coming, he said quietly, reining in his horse. Rosalie peered around his shoulder. 3 men on horseback were approaching rapidly from the direction of Silverridge. Trouble? She asked, feeling Nathan's posture change. Maybe, he muttered. Stay behind me and let me do the talking. The riders slowed as they approached, eyeing Nathan and Rosalie with open curiosity. The lead man, sporting an unkempt beard and a scar across his cheek, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Well now, what do we have here? Ain't often we see such a pretty lady on this trail. His gaze lingered inappropriately on Rosalie. We're headed to Silverridge, Nathan replied evenly. Dr. Evans is bringing medical supplies for the fever outbreak. The mention of her profession seemed to surprise the men. The leader's smile faltered slightly. A lady doctor, that's a new one. We should be on our way, Nathan said, making to move past them. Not so fast, the man replied, maneuvering his horse to block their path. Trail tax, friend, $10 ought to cover it. Nathan's laugh was cold. There's no tax on this trail and you boys are no tax collectors. The atmosphere tensed immediately. The 3 men spread out slightly, hands hovering near their weapons. Perhaps I could offer medical assistance instead, Rosalie interjected, feeling Nathan's muscles coil beneath her hands. That cough sounds terrible, she added, addressing the youngest of the 3, who indeed had been suppressing a wet-sounding cough. The young man looked surprised. You got something for that? I do, she confirmed, and for that infected cut on your hand as well. The leader looked annoyed at this interruption to his intimidation tactics, but seemed unwilling to pass up free medical care. Fine, he growled after a moment. Show us what you got, lady doctor. With careful movements, Rosalie dismounted and retrieved her medical bag. Nathan remained on horseback, his hand never straying far from the revolver at his hip as she treated the young man's persistent cough and the festering cut on the older man's hand. "Keep it clean and it'll heal," she instructed, repacking her supplies. "And you," she addressed the coughing man, "should see a proper doctor in town. That could develop into pneumonia if left untreated." The leader studied her thoughtfully. "You heading to help with the fever outbreak?" "Yes," Rosalie confirmed. "I understand it's quite serious." Something in the man's expression shifted. "My sister's girl is down with it," he admitted. "Doctor there says he's running out of medicine." "Then you understand why we need to hurry," Nathan said firmly. The man nodded reluctantly. "Get along then," and he hesitated. "Thank you, madam." As they continued their journey, Rosalie felt Nathan gradually relax. "That could have gone much worse," she observed. "You handled it perfectly," he replied with newfound respect in his voice. "I was ready to shoot my way out if necessary." "Violence isn't always the answer out here," she said. "Sometimes people just need help, even if they ask for it poorly." Nathan glanced back at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Your father taught you more than just medicine, didn't he?" "He taught me to see people, not just patients," Rosalie explained. "Everyone has a story, a reason for being who they are." The sun was beginning to set when they finally reached Silverridge. The small town consisted of one main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them. Despite the late hour, activity was evident as they approached. "Dr. Evans," called a middle-aged man hurrying toward them as they rode in. "Thank the Lord you've made it. We were about to send a search party when you didn't arrive yesterday." "I had an accident on the trail," Rosalie explained as Nathan helped her down from the horse. "Mr. Lawson here saved my life and brought me to town." The man, who introduced himself as Mayor Thompson, shook Nathan's hand vigorously. "The town of Silverridge is in your debt, sir. Dr. Evans's monthly visits are our lifeline." "Just happened to be in the right place," Nathan replied modestly. The mayor quickly organized help to unload the medical supplies and directed them to the town's small hotel. "Room and board is on the house for both of you," he insisted. "Dr. Wright will be eager to see you at the clinic first thing tomorrow, Dr. Evans." Too exhausted to argue, Rosalie gratefully accepted the offer. As she and Nathan sat down to their first proper meal since the accident, she noticed him wincing slightly as he used his knife and fork. "Your hands are paining you," she observed quietly. "They'll heal," he dismissed, though he couldn't entirely hide his discomfort. "Let me check them after dinner," she insisted. "I don't want my rescuer losing the use of his hands because of infection." Something warm flickered in Nathan's eyes at her concern. "Yes, madam." Later, in the privacy of her hotel room, Rosalie carefully unwrapped the bandages. The wounds looked clean but were clearly painful. She applied a fresh poultice and rewrapped them with gentle fingers. "You have a remarkable touch," Nathan said softly. Gentle but confident, their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Rosalie became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. "I should let you rest," he said, breaking the moment as he stood. "Tomorrow will be busy for you." "Nathan," she called as he reached the door. "Will you be staying in Silverridge long?" He hesitated. "I have work to complete in the area, a week perhaps." Rosalie nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of relief in her chest. "Good night, then." "Good night, Dr. Evans." The fever outbreak kept Rosalie busy from dawn till dusk over the next several days. The illness had affected nearly a third of Silverridge's population, with children and the elderly suffering the worst symptoms. Working alongside the town's elderly doctor, she barely had time to eat or sleep, moving from patient to patient with tireless dedication. Each evening, however, she found Nathan waiting for her at the hotel, a hot meal saved from the dining room and quiet company that required nothing of her except her presence. These moments became precious islands of calm in the storm of her work. On the fourth night, as they sat by the fire in the hotel's small parlor, Nathan shared the progress of his mapping work. "There's a pass through the western hills that could save the railway nearly 20 miles, he explained, his eyes alight with enthusiasm as he showed her his carefully drawn maps. If the company approves my recommendation, it could change everything for towns like this one. Bringing the railway would certainly help with medical access, Rosalie agreed, watching the way his bandaged hands moved expressively as he spoke. The wounds were healing well, though scars would remain permanent reminders of the day he'd saved her. I've been thinking, Nathan said, his tone shifting to something more hesitant, about more permanent arrangements. Rosalie's heart skipped a beat. What kind of arrangements? The railway company has offered me a position overseeing the western Colorado territory. It would mean settling in one place, perhaps Denver, with regular travel to outlying areas. That sounds like a good opportunity, she said carefully, unsure where he was leading. Nathan met her eyes directly. I've spent years wandering, Rosalie. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, but lately, I've been thinking that might not be enough anymore. The use of her first name sent a warm flush through her. In the days they'd known each other, he'd been careful to address her as Dr. Evans in public, showing respect for her profession that few men bothered with. What changed your mind? She asked softly. I think you know, he replied, his voice equally quiet. Before she could respond, the door burst open and Mayor Thompson rushed in. Dr. Evans, the Wilkins boy has taken a turn. Dr. Wright sent me to fetch you. The moment shattered, Rosalie was on her feet instantly. I'll come right away. Nathan stood as well. Go, we can talk later. But later proved elusive. The Wilkins boy's crisis stretched into a long night of fighting to save his life, followed by a new wave of fever cases that kept Rosalie working around the clock. She caught only glimpses of Nathan over the next 2 days, a reassuring nod across the street, a brief exchange of words as he delivered food to the makeshift hospital the town had established in the church. On the morning of the 7th day, the fever finally began to recede. No new cases had been reported overnight, and those already ill were showing signs of improvement. Exhausted but relieved, Rosalie stepped outside the church into the clear morning light. You look like you could sleep for a week, came Nathan's voice from behind her. She turned to find him leading his horse, saddlebags packed and his surveying equipment secured. Her heart sank at the obvious signs of departure. You're leaving, she stated, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. Got a telegram this morning, he explained. Company wants my report immediately. There's a train leaving from Carson Junction this afternoon. I see. Rosalie struggled to find the right words. Their time together had been brief but intense, forged in crisis and deepened through quiet evenings that had come to mean more than she'd realized until this moment. I spoke with Dr. Wright, Nathan continued, his eyes never leaving hers. He says the crisis is passing. You'll be heading back to Denver soon? Yes, once I'm sure the outbreak is controlled. The mayor is arranging for a new wagon since mine was destroyed. Nathan nodded, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. My report includes a recommendation for a railway station here in Silverridge. If the company accepts it, it would make your monthly journeys considerably safer. That would be wonderful for the town, Rosalie said sincerely, though her thoughts were more selfishly focused on the man before her than on railway logistics. I also recommended a medical car, he continued, a dedicated space for a traveling doctor to treat patients along the line. Rosalie's eyes widened. That's forward-thinking. I had good inspiration, Nathan said with a small smile. Then more seriously, I'd like to call on you in Denver when I return from presenting my findings. Hope bloomed in Rosalie's chest. I'd like that very much. For a moment, they stood in silence, the bustle of the recovering town continuing around them. Then, with careful movements mindful of his still healing hands, Nathan reached out to touch her cheek. You're remarkable, Rosalie Evans, he said softly. I've never met anyone quite like you. I could say the same about the man who lifted a wagon with his bare hands to save a stranger, she replied, her voice catching slightly. Not a stranger, he corrected. Not anymore. Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of watching eyes in the small town, but filled with promise. When they parted, Rosalie felt a certainty she hadn't expected. Write to me, she said. Let me know when you'll return. Count on it, he promised. 2 months later, Rosalie stood on the platform of Denver's bustling train station, watching anxiously as passengers disembarked from the eastbound train. Her medical practice had kept her busy, but thoughts of Nathan had occupied her quiet moments. His letters, arriving regularly despite his travels, had only deepened the connection they'd formed in those intense days in Silverridge. And then she saw him, taller than most of the other travelers, his eyes searching the crowd until they found her. The smile that spread across his face mirrored the one she couldn't suppress. "Dr. Evans," he greeted formally as he reached her, though his eyes told a different story. "Mr. Lawson," she replied with equal formality, barely containing her joy. "Welcome to Denver." "I bring news," he said, offering his arm to escort her from the platform. The scars on his hands had faded to silvery lines, visible reminders of their first meeting. "The railway board approved my recommendations. Construction begins next spring." "That's wonderful news for the region," Rosalie said sincerely. "There's more," Nathan continued as they walked. "They've offered me a permanent position overseeing the Colorado Territory operations. I'll be based here in Denver." Rosalie's heart leapt at his words. "So you'll be staying?" "If I have sufficient reason to," he replied, his tone careful but his meaning clear. She stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "I believe you do, Mr. Lawson." In the years that followed, the story of how they met became something of a legend among their friends and eventually their children, how Rosalie had been trapped beneath the wagon until Nathan lifted it with bloodied hands. How they'd faced down bandits and battled a fever outbreak together. How a chance encounter during a thunderstorm had changed both their lives forever. The railway did indeed transform the region, making Rosalie's medical services more accessible to remote communities. Nathan's work ensuring its proper construction and operation brought him respect throughout the territory. But it was their partnership in life, in work, in the family they built together that truly defined them. On their 25th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their Denver home watching their 3 children and first grandchild playing in the garden, Nathan took Rosalie's hand in his, the matching scars on their palms telling different chapters of the same story. "Do you ever think about how different life might have been if I hadn't happened along that trail that day?" he asked. Rosalie smiled, the years having only deepened her appreciation for the man beside her. "I believe some people are meant to find each other, no matter what storms stand in their way. Like a doctor from Denver and a railway scout." Nathan's eyes, crinkled now with laugh lines but still that same striking blue, held the same warmth they had when he'd first looked at her trapped beneath the wagon. "Exactly like that," Rosalie agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder as the western sun painted the sky in colors no artist could capture, much like the love they'd found in the most unexpected of circumstances.